Hello, everybody, and welcome to our virtual tax school webinar series. My name is Amar Medic, and I am the product marketing manager here at TaxWise. TaxWise means business, and we are excited for the new 2024 tax season. We're announcing that tax preparers will finally be able to file business returns, so Forms 1065 and 1120S, directly within our cloud-based solution, TaxWise Online. As part of this, in today's webinar, we'll be covering business returns basics. We will go over the ins and outs of the 1065 business return and walk you through the process of filing a partnership return using TaxWise Online. Please keep in mind we do host one of these webinars per month, so if you find today's session to be informative, please be sure to join us in the future as well, as we'd love to have you. Throughout the webinar, you'll be able to submit questions to the team and get those answered live at the end. And with that said, I'm very pleased to introduce to our main speakers for today, Beverly Henry and Ryan Hubbs. They are both solutions architects here at Wolters Kluwer with years of business in the tax industry. They'll be sharing their insights on how to prepare business returns. So with that, let's get started. Beverly and Ryan, please take it away.
All right, and hello everyone. Welcome to today's TaxWise Online Tax School webinar, focusing on Form 1065. Now, before we get started, can someone please type in the questions box that you can hear me and see the slides? So just so that I know everybody can hear me. All right, and welcome. Okay, great. And welcome in TaxWise Online. It is your virtual tax office, a tax software solution to help you in the prepare market to prepare more tax returns quickly with greater accuracy and efficiency. Now, today's focus will be introducing those partnership returns, Form 1065, that you will soon be able to prepare in TaxWise Online in November. Now, we have quite a few people attending today, so if you have any questions during the webinar, please type those in the questions box, and after the presentation, we will look for those. And if you think of any questions after the webinar, please reach out to your sales consultant, and we'll work on getting those questions answered. Well, I am Beverly Henry, one of the hosts, and I am a CPA, previously working in public accounting for about 11 years. Before I came here to Wolters Kluwer about 2 years ago, and Ryan.
Yes, and my name is Ryan Hubbs. I also have my background in accounting and spent about 7 or 8 years after I graduated in Washington, D.C., working for really 2 CPA firms up there. And when I was there, I did a little bit of everything, did some audit, some nonprofit work, but the vast majority of what I was doing was taxes, taxes, taxes. So I can definitely relate to the grind of trying to get through so many returns in a condensed amount of time. And one of my goals of today's presentation is really going to show you some of the tools that we have to complete these business returns, where you can not only get them done quickly, but you should also get them done accurately.
All right. Well, Ryan and I are both solution architects, which means we show the many Wolters Kluwer solutions, presenting to you the tools in our software that create a more productive and streamlined process for you, so you are more profitable. So today, we're excited to be presenting TaxWise Online and to show you what it's going to look like when the business returns roll out in November. Now, before we go into an actual live demonstration of the software, I'll be giving you a very broad overview. What are partnerships? What are partners? Before Ryan takes you into TaxWise Online. So the next slide, please. And just first, a little bit about Wolters Kluwer. Wolters Kluwer has been a leader in software solutions for a whole lot of years now. We are the name brand in tax software, and we are reliable, and we've got your back. We are here for you. And at Wolters Kluwer, we continue to create and deliver innovative technology solutions that empower our customers. Our products and services are used by the Big Four, 94 of the top 100 firms in the United States. But we are not just for large firms. Thousands of firms of all sizes, all the way down to sole practitioners use our solutions. The needs of a small firm are just as important as big firms. And when small firms use our products, they get to leverage all that intellect that is built into our products and receive that same level of service. Next slide, please. So here are our objectives for today. We're going to talk about who files those 1065s. We'll see how to report the partnership's financial information from a trial balance, and what is a Schedule K-1, and how TaxWise Online creates it. Also very important, those filing due dates, because if those are missed, steep penalties can be imposed. And then from there, Ryan will take you through an example of what a Form 1065 looks like in TaxWise Online. Oh, and also to make it more interesting, more fun, we're going to have some polling questions scattered throughout this webinar. All right, next slide, please. As you know, TaxWise Online is a browser-based tax software for those in the prepare market. And many of you have been already using TaxWise Online, been using it for several years now to prepare 1040s. But coming, like I said, in November, we're going to be adding Forms 1065 and S-Corp returns. For those other business return types or for trust returns, TaxWise Desktop is included, so that you can still prepare those. But in today's presentation, we will just be focusing on partnership returns in TaxWise Online. And since TaxWise Online is a browser-based tax software, as you know, because it's in the cloud, you can access anytime, anywhere, on any device, a laptop, tablet, even a smartphone. As long as you've got that internet connection, it is your virtual tax office. All right, next slide, please. So what are the more common types of business entities? Well, there's 4 common types of business entities for tax purposes that we usually see. There's corporations, S-corps, limited liability companies, and partnerships. So today we're just going to be looking at partnerships and introducing how its income and expenses are reported on a tax return. All right, next slide, please. So what is a partnership? A partnership is, per the IRS, a partnership is a relationship between 2 or more people to do a trade or business. Each person contributes money, property, labor, or skill, and shares in the profits and losses of the business. A partnership must have at least 2 partners. That makes sense? You have to have 2 people to be in a partnership and to file a partnership return. You cannot file a partnership return if there is only 1 person. And a partnership reports its income and expenses on a Form 1065, and then click for the next point. And for tax purposes, it is a pass-through entity, which means partnerships are not taxed as a separate entity. Form 1065 is only an information return, so there's no taxes. The tax is returned at the partner's level. Each partner will receive a Schedule K-1 from the partnership. The K-1 shows what that partner's ownership percentage is, their share of the partnership's income and expenses. And then the next point. Then the partners they get their very own Schedule K-1 received from the partnership, and each partner reports those amounts. That is their ownership percentage on their individual tax return, Form 1040. A partnership return is due May 15th, and if extended, September 15th. Those due dates are very important to remember because steep penalties can be imposed on the partners for those late filed returns. And then the next slide. So it is best, don't miss a deadline because it is very costly. A late filed partnership return, the last time I looked, it's $220 for each person who was a partner at any time during the tax year, which starts to add up and continues for each part month that it is filed late. All right, so now this might be a good time for a polling question. What is a partnership? Give you guys a chance to read and then answer. So what is a partnership? And then Amar, are the results coming in?
Sorry, I think we may have to skip. We didn't have the right. It looks like the questions were wrong. So if you can just go through the questions you have, we didn't set up the polls correctly.
Oh, okay. Well, for those of you, if your answer was C, you are correct. Now, of course, it's not A because a partnership return is only an informational return, doesn't pay any tax. It's not going to be B because you have to have more than one person to be a partnership, and then not D because the due dates are March 15th and if extended to September the 15th. All right, Ryan, this might be a good time to go into TaxWise Online.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverly. So how this presentation is going to be set up is, Beverly's going to be explaining some of the more big picture items. Then I will occasionally be going into the tax software to go ahead and really show the practical side of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and tab over here. And I'm actually already logged into the TaxWise 2023 version. Now I have a pilot version where business returns have already been released. These are going to be releasing in November. But the main point that I want to get across right now is look how similar this looks to what you're currently using. We have the same tabs up above as before. We have the same items down below that we could click on. And really the point that I'm trying to get across is your general setup isn't really going to change from one to the other. Where you may see a little bit of a difference is if we actually go to the tax returns tab. Well, I just have a couple of returns in here since this is a pilot version of the software. But if you go and take a look at the package column right here, well, here are my different returns. And I do have two partnerships. We're going to be focusing on this first one today. But before we go and jump into this return, look, my individual 1040s going to be located in the same area. I also have an 1120S S Corp return, all located in the same area. Now, once you go and get the next year's version of TaxWise that has the business returns in it, you will be able to filter and sort based off the package. So if you just want to look at your partnership returns, you would type in partner here. It would remove the other returns from your list. As far as like a general setup, admin side of things, that's really going to be the biggest difference that you're going to see. Everything else should be functionally the same as before the business returns were released. But really where we want to go today is we want to go ahead and focus on a partnership. And I'm just going to click on the EIN number to go ahead and load up this return. And once we go and click on this, what we are currently looking at is page 1 of the 1065. And if you've ever done a 1040, which I'm pretty sure everyone here has, this may look a bit familiar to you, right? This general data input or the screen that we're looking at, it's really just starting off with basic information. Now, if you were working on a 1040, it would be asking for what's the first name, what's the last name of the taxpayer. If they have a spouse, you'd be inputting that information as well, along with their social security number. But the core, general setup is going to be the same. Or instead of putting in the name of the taxpayer and spouse, going to be putting in the name of a business. If we go ahead and jump over here, instead of a social security number, we're just putting in their EIN. Once we get to address, etc., this is really our general setup for this return. And it's meant to be set up in a way that it looks very similar to the 1040. And, thinking back many years ago when I first was getting into accounting, I started off with 1040s. It became what I really got comfortable with. Maybe like my first 2 years, I almost did exclusively 1040s. What you're probably going to find out with partnership returns is once you get the hang of it and once you get the knack of like getting them done, in my opinion, if it's not an overly complicated return, I think you're actually going to be able to, this is going to be a little bit easier for you all to complete. And there's going to be a couple of reasons for that, and we're going to explain those reasons. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and scroll down our list. Now, as we scroll down, there is some more basic data input that needs to be input. And really the first portion of page 1 of the 1065 is just getting our return set up, really no different than the 1040. We would have to give it a general business purpose. If they're selling a specific product or service, we would need to specify that. The IRS is going to want to know. And each service will have its own category code. There is a list that you can kind of select from, or, sometimes it's a little bit quicker. You can always just go and quickly search for it and type in the amounts. Now, the next kind of area that's going to be required is going to be the accounting method. Each business is going to have an accounting method that they select. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, most of the businesses that I have worked with have gone ahead and used the accrual method of accounting. Occasionally, I will run into cash, and that is another option that we could select. But even if they're, you run into one of those niche, rare situations where they're not selecting one of these two, you will have the ability to check the other box, and then you can just type in what type of method they're using. But really the main point that I want to get across is once I go and select the accrual method, look, it's removing the red highlights from the other boxes. And that's because all of the general checks that are within the 1040 version of TaxWise are all still going to be applicable within a 1065 or even an 1120 return. And if we actually go and take a look and glance over at our tree, look, this is the same setup that you should be familiar with, where some of these items are in green, and then a lot of these items have the red exclamation point and the fonts in red next to them. Well, just like with the 1040, as you go through field by field, the tax software is going to constantly be doing an internal check to make sure that any of the required bits of information that we have to have in order to get this return accepted have been filled out within the tax software. So I think when some of you really start working on the tax returns within TaxWise Online, you're going to notice that some of the worksheets are going to be different. Maybe the forms themselves are a bit different, but your general workflow should stay relatively the same. And one of the benefits to doing a business return, in this instance, a 1065 partnership, as opposed to a 1040, if you look at your tree on a 1040, it is not uncommon to have a ton of different items in here. We have a ton of different worksheets, right? We have a worksheet for wages. Each and every individual 1099 is going to have its own worksheet. And then if we start adding in Schedule C, Schedule E, all these items appear on the tree. Well, within TaxWise Online for these business returns, there's going to be one primary worksheet that is going to be doing the majority of the calculations for us. It's really where we're going to be doing the majority of the data entry, and then we're going to see it flow through throughout the return. And we're going to spend a bunch of time within it, but just so we can go ahead and add it to this return real quickly, it's going to be the trial balance worksheet. And with the trial balance worksheet, just to give you a little sneak peek before we take a deep dive, once I go and add this to the return, it's really set up in two different sections. We're going to have the top portion, which we are currently looking at, where on the left-hand side, it's going to have our assets. And then on the right-hand side, it's going to have our liabilities and equity. And for the time being, really the only thing to know about it is as you go and type in this information, which we will do later, the data is going to flow through into the forms of the tax return. And then very importantly, once we get to the bottom, it's going to add up all of the assets on the left-hand side. It's going to add up all the liability and capital on the right-hand side, and these two amounts must be the same. But we'll kind of talk about some checks and how we're really going to go about accomplishing this. This is just to give you a quick little peek before we do the deep dive. And the other section that we're going to have here is the income and expenses. Now, this is a totally separate section from above with the balance sheet items, but this is where you're going to report things like what are their sales, what wages or 1099 labor did they have to pay out, and you can kind of see some of the examples on the screen here here. And we'll kind of walk through and talk through, what exactly is a trial balance and how are we going to use this to fill out this sheet. But I think once we kind of visually take a look at it, it's going to make a lot of sense to us. Now, before I go and turn this back over to Beverly, so we can kind of talk about the only other thing that I want to go over right now is I'm really focusing on the similarities between 1040s and business returns. Eventually we'll get into the differences, but with the different pages of the 1065, the two pages where the most financial information is going to go is going to be page 1. We kind of went down to the general setup earlier, but once we scroll down page 1 about halfway, well, look, here are our income items. Here's the gross receipts. Here's our gross profits, etc. And then if we scroll down a bit further, here are our deductions. If you've ever done a Schedule C for a client, this should be looking really, really familiar, right? It's set up in the same format where it starts with income, then it moves on to all the expenses that they had throughout the year. Now, as we go and start to click on some of the different pages, once we get to page 2, what you're going to see is there's just a lot of setup that needs to be done, but it's not necessarily financial information. Your clients should be giving you information like what type of partnership are they? When we continue to scroll down this list, it's going to start asking them some qualifying questions so the software can start to figure out, okay, what kind of deductions are they going to qualify for? Are there any additional forms that need to be input into our tree on the left-hand side? And if it is something that's critical that must be, answered in order for the IRS to accept this return, like I iterated earlier, we are going to have our red boxes that are going to be our check to make sure that we are not forgetting anything that is required. And, due to time constraints, I'm really not going to have enough time to go through each and every page. But just so you know the general setup and flow, page 1 is going to be the basic data input. It's also going to be the income and expenses. Pages 2, 3, 4, 5, this is primarily going to be, these different check boxes. You may have some information flowing through from your trial balance worksheet. And then once we get to page 6, this will also be a very important page, and this will be a bit different than the middle pages, where we are going to have a balance sheet with a beginning balance. We are going to have an ending balance as well. And just to kind of break this down, we were looking at the trial balance earlier, where I said it had to be in balance. Well, as we fill out this worksheet, the trial balance worksheet, the data is going to flow through, particularly into this end of tax year amount. And if that worksheet was within balance, once you go and see the end result here, which we'll look at later, you will see that this is within balance as well. Now, the last thing to talk about is the beginning of the year tax balances. For the left-hand side of this column, I have gone and typed in some information into these fields, so we had something to look at. Now, if you are just starting off on your journey to completing business returns and 1065s, etc., for year 1, this column is most likely going to be blank for you. Reason is you have not done the prior year tax return. However, once you have done the 2024 tax return, and let's say you roll it forward into 2025, how this is going to work with the roll forward is it will take your end of year balance and it is going to populate on the left-hand side here for your beginning balance. So this is really an area of the tax return you may fill out once if it's a brand new return or you're just getting started with your business returns, but eventually this is all going to roll forward, just reducing a lot of that data entry. So with all that being said, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn this back over to Beverly, and we're going to kind of talk through what is a trial balance, and we'll have a visual cue so we can kind of look at it and go through it together. And then once we do that, we're going to go ahead, jump back in the TaxWise and start doing some of the data prep into this return. So Beverly, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the PowerPoint. Give me 1 second here, and then I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. So this is an example of a basic trial balance. A trial balance is a financial report for the business entity. So you could actually say that a trial balance is a balance sheet and income statement combined. And this is a very basic trial balance. You've got your account numbers, the account names, you've got your debits and credits, and notice that debits and credits must tie. So in this trial balance, we first see the balance sheet accounts, the assets. You've got the cash accounts, you've got the accounts receivable, and then the liability account, your accounts payable, and then the equity. There's two partners in this partnership. Total equity is $100,000. So Charles owns 60%. He owns a 60% interest in this partnership, and James a 40% interest. And then after the equity section, you've got the income. You've got the gross receipts and then the expenses. So a trial balance is the balance sheet and the income statement combined. A trial balance can be produced in the taxpayer's bookkeeping software, such as QuickBooks. And a big difference between preparing a 1040 and a 1065 is with a partnership return. When you're preparing a Form 1065, you have a balance sheet in the tax return called a Schedule L in the Form 1065, and that it must balance. So to prepare a Form 1065, this is basically your main work paper that you will be using. So let's go to the next slide. This might be a good time for a quick polling question. What is a trial balance? Can read through those, see what you come up with. Boy, and it looks like you guys are great. The answer is B. The trial balance is a financial report. Reports the partnership's assets, liabilities, owner's equity, income, and expenses. And then that information is reported on Form 1065. All right, so Brian is now going to show you how to enter a basic trial balance into a Form 1065 in TaxWise Online.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beverly. So for this next section, the area of the tax return that we're really going to be focusing on is the trial balance worksheet that we were kind of had a little quick sneak peek of a little bit earlier, but now we're really starting to go and dive into this. And like I was saying, there are two sections. I'm not going to reiterate. I will reiterate. We're going to have our assets and liabilities up above, and then we're going to have our income statement items down below. And the 2 pages specifically where this information, once we input it, where it's going to flow through and we'll take a look at, it's one, it's going to go and flow through to the income and deductions. And then 2, like we were looking at earlier, it is also going to flow into the balance sheet that we were just looking at with the beginning and the end of year tax balance. And how we're functionally going to use our different tools is what we're going to want to do when we first start to go and prepare a return. So we're going to want to go to our trial balance input. And really one thing that I do want to show off real quickly is, within TaxWise, we have our link to worksheet feature, right? Well, when I go through and start linking to many of these worksheets, look, it's linking to the trial balance. If I go to my returns and allowances, we go ahead and link it. Bear with me for 1 second here. You can see it's linking to the trial balance. If we come down to our expenses section, we'll go to, bad debt expense right here, or repairs and maintenance. Link it one last time, linking to the trial balance. So the vast majority, the point I'm trying to get across is the vast majority of your return is going to link to the trial balance. Now, I don't want to oversell it. There may be some other supplemental worksheets you occasionally have to fill out, but by and large, when getting these returns done, you're going to want to start off with your trial balance worksheet. And we're actually going to go in inverse order today. I think it's a little bit easier to explain and teach. If you actually go and skip the balance sheet items, we will come back to them. But if you actually go to the bottom section here, these are going to be the income items. And how you're going to use your balance sheet your trial balance to go ahead and fill these out is, let's go ahead and look. Well, the way that these are normally set up is the account number is going to give you a really big clue as to where it's supposed to be reported. So starting off with these first items like the petty cash and the regular checking account, as well as the accounts receivable, all of these start with a 1. That's because all of these are assets. If we go down one more to the accounts payable, right here, it's starting with the 2. That's 2s are normally, accounts payable, or liabilities is really the word that I should use. But for the income and expenses section, we're going to start off with the 4,100. And this is going to be our gross receipts and sales. As we can see, okay, they had $50,000 in sales for the year. So we would go back in to our trial balance worksheet, and we're going to go ahead and input that amount into the software. We're going to go ahead and say, okay, Here are the $50,000 in sales. And just like with the 1040 return, as soon as you go and input data into these fields, it's going to go and start populating the return for us. So if we go back to page 1 of the 1065 and we scroll down, well, here is the $50,000 in sales that we just input. And you can see that it's doing some calculations, kind of trickling on down from the original input. But to go through and start inputting more of the data into this worksheet, where we're going to want to go ahead and go next is let's go past the gross receipts. Well, all of these items down below here, these are going to be primarily expense items that are going to be reported on the deduction side of this worksheet. And I'm not going to go through and input every single one of these, but we are going to go through quite a few, just so you can kind of get a feel of how this is going to work. So we're going to start off with our advertising. Our advertising is $1,500. I'm going to come down to the other expenses section. I'm going to find advertising. We're going to go ahead and type that amount into the box. We would then next go to office expenses right here. We're going to see, okay, this is $650. We would go and find the office expenses section, which I believe is a little bit further down below. Here it is. We're going to type in the amount into the office expenses section. Now, like I said, not going to go through each and every one of these, but just to go through a few more, let's go ahead and input some insurance right here. I believe that was $3,000. And really ideally, how you're going to want to have your different worksheets and your financial documents from your client set up is if you have multiple monitors, it's really going to streamline this process for you. Where I can tell you when I'm working on business returns, I will typically take my trial balance, whether it's in an Excel sheet, QuickBooks, wherever, however I got the information. I'm going to put that on one monitor, and then I'm going to go ahead and, type in the corresponding amounts into TaxWise. Now, today I can only share one monitor with you, which is the reason why I'm tabbing so much back and forth, but would highly recommend getting 2 monitors if possible. And thinking of this, really a lot of times when you see the gross receipts and sales, this could be a real big delineation line for you as to where the information is going to be reported. Typically, once you get to these sales and everything down beneath it, it's going to be reported in this same section for the expenses as well. And navigating back to page 1, now that we've input some information, let's go ahead and scroll down. Well, as we scroll down, look, a lot of these are still zeroed out, right? It's because we haven't used the corresponding inputs. But if we scroll down a bit further, all of the deductions that I've been putting in for this particular return are in the other deductions section. And, it's actually going to pretty clearly state within our worksheet where it's going to go and be reported. So just to kind of visualize this one more time, we can see some expenses here for purchases, cost of labor, other costs, etc. But once we get to this other section, by and large, the vast majority of these are just going to go to the other deduction section within the 1065 return itself. So you're always going to have some cues within your worksheets to kind of let you know where these are going to be reported. But occasionally you may run into one of these areas up above where you need, it's not another deduction. It's really just a one-to-one. You input the item on the worksheet. It goes and flows through into this section of your tax return. Well, those will all clearly be listed within our worksheet. And when it comes to those income and expense items within the return, this is going to be your general workflow. Now, you're typically not going to fill up all of these different fields. I can tell you from my personal experience, I've never, ever input farming income. I'm from the East Coast, not a lot of farms around where I am. So this is an area I've always left blank. But, something that you might typically see are rentals. I mean, I think that's pretty common for a lot of businesses if they have some rental activities going on, whether it's bringing in some money or potentially even spending money on the rental. So you'll kind of become experts in your own particular fields. Now, if you ever have multiple expenses, that could be maybe input into one particular area. Maybe you have 2 items within the trial balance that could be reported within one field here. Just like TaxWise Online with the 1040s, you can always make those corresponding statements to kind of add up the different accounts. And so your end result is the total of all of these different accounts. And that's really the one thing to kind of maybe a little bit different for you is, yes, we're working with a trial balance today that's in my opinion, it's a pretty easy to follow trial balance. It's not overly complex, but occasionally you will have to make some professional judgments when you have 2 accounts that are similar, but they're being reported separately. Are these 2 items that should be combined, or is there going to be two separate areas? And if you're ever not quite sure, as a general rule of thumb, there's going to be a catch-all section within the tax software right here where you can just go and type in specific amounts. So if you're ever not quite sure where one of these goes up above, always feel free to go here. I'm just going to go ahead and use miscellaneous expenses, type in $1,000, and this will be your catch-all to really input any of those amounts that you're not quite sure of. Now, the other portion of this that we really want to go ahead and focus on today is the balance sheet. And I can tell you, when I was first learning how to do business returns, the balance sheet was always the trickiest part for me. It was always the part that was the toughest to learn, right? The income and expenses I find to be pretty straightforward. You just go find it, you plug it in, and then it goes and flows into the tax return. Well, when it comes to the balance sheet, and let's actually go ahead and jump to page 6 of this tax return. Well, these are the amounts that we're going to have to go and fill out. And like I was saying earlier, your end results for the beginning of the year and the end of the year are always going to balance out with one another. And how we're going to go about doing the data input for this is, let's go ahead and jump back to our input sheet. And let's go ahead and focus on the top portion now. Now, as I look at some of these different items, cash, trade notes, accounts receivable, inventories, these are all the assets. These are all, the items that the company currently has, typically making it worth more money. And then we're going to have liabilities like accounts payable, other current liabilities, mortgages, etc. These are things that the company owes money on. Maybe they've received the good or service, but they still need to go ahead and pay for it. That's what you're going to see in the liability section. But once again, very similar to the income and expenses portion of this. If we actually go and navigate back to our trial balance, well, it's all kind of listed out here based off the numbering schematics. And when we come to our very first item, let's look at our cash account. Well, we have petty cash, which is going to be $1,000. We're also going to have our regular checking account of just over $100,000 roughly, right? Well, if we go back into the software for our cash, there's really only one line item. So this would be one of those scenarios where we're going to have to know to combine the two amounts into a total. And like I was saying earlier, you could just go ahead and bring up a statement to go ahead and input it if you want to make a scratch pad. But since this is a pretty, in my opinion, pretty easy math, we're just going to go ahead and just add it up in our head. So it's $104,450. And we will go ahead and type that in to the field right there. And then we're going to go ahead and look at our accounts receivable. Now, once we tab back, it looks like we have just one accounts receivable item. And, this is typically when the business has made a sale or, they've given the good or the service that they're selling, but they haven't yet been paid. Well, we're going to take this $30,000. We're just going to go ahead and plug it into the accounts receivable. Looks like we just have the one account. So no reason to do the math. I think I added an extra zero there. So let's go ahead and delete that. And we're going to go ahead and tab over. And this is a pretty similar input process to what we were just looking at. It's just a little bit different input on where we're going to input the items. To go ahead and jump into some of these accounts payable, or so I should really say some of these liabilities, we're going to have some accounts payable of $6,000. Well, that's just going to be on the opposite half of our worksheet, where we would then go and find the accounts payable. We're going to go ahead and input the information. And if we were to now, after we've entered in a few of these different accounts, go back and jump back to the balance sheet within the 1065, what we're going to see is, okay, here is the ending year balances starting to trickle from the trial balance worksheet. Well, it's pushing it into our tax return for us. Now, obviously, ours is still not in balance. It would take quite a bit more work to get these to perfectly balance out. And looking at where we're at with the timing of the presentation, I don't think we're going to have enough time to go through each and every item to go ahead and get this to balance. But what you really need to know, and I think what's going to be really important to you all, is that if your trial balance at the bottom, if your debits and your credits are the same amount, eventually you are working with a good trial balance and you are going to be able to get those to balance out. If you ever see that your TB or your trial balance is not balancing with the credits and the debits, you have a major problem. That is going to be your heads up to really not even start working on the tax return yet. You're going to have to adjust this to get everything to balance out, double check the numbers. And then only once these two, these debits and these credits are showing the same amount, should you be going into TaxWise and really, starting to prepare the tax return. So that's really the first thing that you always want to do when you get financial information from your clients is make sure you're working with good financial information. I can tell you from personal experience, I have definitely input a trial balance that wasn't quite right, and it can be it can cost you a lot of time, right? So just doing a couple checks right at the beginning are going to be very beneficial to you. Now, like I was saying earlier, there may be some other supplemental worksheets that you need in order to report all of the required information to the IRS. But where you're always going to want to start is with your trial balance worksheet. And you're going to want to go ahead and complete this and get all of the information input before you start moving on to those corresponding worksheets. And just to give you an example, I mean, there are hundreds of different worksheets within TaxWise. You're probably not going to run into each and every one of these time and time again, but to just give you an example of something that you might, if I go and type in cost, well, if they're actually selling an actual good, there's going to be a cost of good worksheet that we may need to fill out. And just like, doing a 1040, once we add in the corresponding worksheet, it just populates in our tree. And then from here, we could go and start marking this up. But the main point that I'm trying to get across is this is going to be your primary worksheet. And if you can master this worksheet, you'll definitely be 100% done with a lot of your returns. Some of the more complicated businesses may have some additional worksheets that you have to go and kind of learn how to do and how to add them in the software. But if you can master this, you're going to be able to get through the vast majority of your tax returns, or even the vast majority of a more complicated return. So with all of that being said, really the next portion of the presentation to focus on is going to be the K1s. And, just to briefly explain it, with a 1040, that's really where their K1s are going to be reported. But with a K1 within a business return, this is where those K1s that you input into the 1040 are going to be created. And we have a slide here, and Beverly's going to kind of walk us through this slide in order to give us a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of understanding about the K1s. And then I'm briefly going to show off this section going back into the tax software. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen up the PowerPoint. And I'm going to go ahead and navigate to our K1 slide, and then I'm going to go ahead and let Beverly take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Ryan. So what we're looking at, this is an example of what a Schedule K1 looks like. And you're going to see that there's 3 sections. On the left, you've got Part 1. That's the partnership's information. This is Bilco. This is a K1 from Bilco Partnership. And then in Part 2, information about the partner. You'll see John Smith. John Smith is a partner in this partnership return. And if you go down a little bit more on the left, you see that John Smith is a 40% owner. He has 40% ownership in this partnership. And then Part 3 over there on your right, this is the partner share of current year income, deductions, credits, and other items. So this, what we're seeing Part 3, this is John's share of the partnership's income. And line 1 in Part 3, ordinary business income. So this is John's share of that from Bilco. And this is going to be reported, line 1 is going to be reported on page 2 of Schedule E on John's 1040. And if you scroll down a little bit, you've got line 5, interest income. We see of $1,017. John is going to report this on Schedule B of his 1040. And then we have ordinary dividends, qualified dividends. Just like, this is a lot like what you see that John would see if he received a 1099 interest statement from his bank. So this is an example of what a K1 will look like in a partnership return. So Ryan, let's take it back to you.
Well, I think we want to do a quick polling question, right? Is that correct?
Yep. Oh, that's right.
So we got an easy one for you here, just a true false. So you got a 50% shot at getting this right.
Yeah.
If you don't know. But just to read it off for you, a partner in a partnership entity will receive a Schedule K1 reporting their ownership interest of the partnership's income and losses. We'll go ahead. We'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and answer this, and then Beverly will actually give an explanation of the answer.
And yay, the answer is you guys are good.
Looks like we have 100% on true, which I've done a lot of these presentations. I've never seen 100% of the people get it right.
100%. Yeah.
Very attentive people in the crowd today, which I always love to see. So we're kind of coming up at, about 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left in this presentation. The last section that I am going to be diving into the tax software with is going to be the K1s. Now, kind of going back and thinking back many years ago, especially when I was first working on 1040s, the K1s were always the thing that gave me the most problems, right? And it's one of the more in-depth forms when you're reporting the K1. But just to kind of walk through that process just one more time, just in case anyone's a little bit confused, the K1 is created in the 1065 return. It will be reported on that specific partner's 1040. So when it comes to the creation of these K1s, well, I have two partners within here. Looks like I have Charles and I have James. You can see within our tree on the left-hand side, the tax software is making a pretty clear distinction between the two. And clicking on Charles's K1 within our tree, some of this is probably going to look fairly familiar to you, where the first beginning sections are really just filling out page 1 of the K1. Who did they work for? Well, this information is going to be pulling, or I should say, who did they own, not who did they work for? What entity do they own? Well, this is really going to be pulling from section 1 or page 1 of our 1065. And as we continue to go down our Schedule K1 for Charles here, well, a lot of this is already filled out. Now, I went beforehand and I actually filled out Charles's information. That's because we need to have an address as to where it's going. We need to specify, okay, who is each partner within this return. And just keep in mind, like Beverly said right at the beginning of this presentation, you need at least 2 partners in order to file a partnership return. So there at least has to be 2, but there could be more. But 2 is the minimum amount. Now, as we continue to scroll down through this, once again, we're going to be relying on our tools that are within TaxWise, where there are plenty of items where we still have to get the red out. Now, I'm not going to go through each one, as it's typically just a checking of a box to go ahead and remove these. But what I want to focus on is this section right here, the partner share of profit, loss, and capital. Now, I have gone and specified that this is 60%. And for each partner within this partnership, each one of them is going to have their share of the profit, loss, and capital. And sometimes it'll be exactly the same. If me and Beverly were to go into business together and we put in the same amount of money, or we had an agreement that we were going to split this business 50-50, then each one's going to be the same, right? We'd be 50-50 partners. However, it is very, very common that not everyone owns the same amount of the partnership, right? So what we have for this particular example is we're looking at Charles right now. He owns 60%. If we were to go to James and scroll down past some of the basic data input, we can actually see that he's at 40%. And really the reason that I'm showing this off, and the point that I have to get across to you all, is this percentage is vastly important. And the reason that's important is the K1s, by and large, a lot of it is going to be filled out directly by the tax software. You will have to specify sometimes, is it direct? Is this amount that's going to be printed? But these amounts that we put, excuse me, let me scroll down here. These amounts that we input is really how, where were we? These amounts here, these are really how it's going to go and specify to the software, okay, these are the amounts that, should be reported with on their K1. And once we, are done with this return and it's been e-filed, Charles, James, they're both going to get a copy of their K1. And then that is when the information is going to be reported on their 1040. And really at its core, the 1065 is an informational return, right? The profits, the losses, if they have to, if they didn't make money, where you're going to see either the taxable benefit or detriment to your customer is really going to be when you're filling out the 1040. We just want to make sure that the information is accurate within the 1065. Now, I know today that we have been throwing a lot of different terminology, a lot of different wordings, and going through a lot of examples today. And if this is your first time really seeing a business return as if you're going to prepare one, uh, there's a lot to learn, right? It's a little bit different. The inputs and the way the software works is pretty much the same, but knowing some of that terminology and knowing how to report some of these things, it's really going to rely on having practical knowledge. However, one of the tools that we have here at Wolters Kluwer with TaxWise is we do offer tax research. So if you are just thinking about making the jump and adding this as part of your business, typically in order to make more revenue. What I want to briefly take a couple minutes and show you today is something called Answer Connect. And Answer Connect is our own in-house research. And if you give me 1 second to find it here in my bookmarks, I will go ahead and open it up. And, by and large, a lot of people are using Answer Connect for 1040 returns. Do I claim this deduction, or do they qualify for this credit? Maybe it's more in depth and they only partially qualify. How much can I take of this credit? But one of the things with Answer Connect is there's also an entire side for business returns as well. So even if you already have it or if you don't have it, where you could really see value within this is as you're going through and navigating around your 1065 and doing your best to go ahead and fill out this return. If you ever run into sections that you're not quite sure about, well, you can always just go into Answer Connect and you can go and type in your keyword. I'm sticking with a really basic search today of just a 1065 return, and we're getting all sorts of different items here. We're getting explanations, we're getting specific forms, we're getting form instructions on how to fill out the particular form. And I had a tool like this when I was first learning how to complete 1065 and 1120 returns for that matter. And every time I would hit a roadblock where I wasn't quite sure what was the best way to proceed with getting this return done, I would go into my tax research. I would, typically I'm not typing in the name of the return, but this is just for a basic example. We're going to just go ahead and click on this topic here. And this will be like a step-by-step either explanation or instructions or just, explanation of the keywords where we can go and kind of research what it is we're not quite sure about. And a tool like this, I can guarantee you, will save you a lot, not only some time as you're learning how to get through these various returns, but also it's going to give you a lot of peace of mind. Answer Connect is what we call authoritative tax research. And authoritative tax research means that if for some reason your client becomes under audit, well, you can always point to the specific article within Answer Connect that you used, and this can be your justification for doing what you did to the IRS. And as we scroll down, even just a real simple basic topic like 1065 return, look, we get specific examples. All of our keywords are going to be highlighted within the return or within this article itself. And, as we start to dive into more specific deductions or maybe some credits that they may or may not qualify for, this is really going to be your guide to learning those different items and give you a lot of peace of mind. Now, with all of that being said, this is actually going to conclude my portion of the presentation. It's my understanding that we've had some questions come in as we were going through the software and giving some of our explanations in PowerPoint. And to kind of close out this presentation, Beverly is actually going to go and read through some of those questions that came in and offer some concise answers in order to try to answer those.
Before we get to the questions, there's one last polling question I'd like to ask. And that is, are you interested in switching to TaxWise Online or learning more about it based off of what you saw today? Please take your time on letting us know, and we'll follow up with you if you are interested. In the questions, there was a question on how to use online. Some people are familiar with desktop, while others aren't. I provided an answer. We have a dedicated support page for all things TaxWise, including TaxWise Online. We also host demos regularly. So Beverly and I believe Ryan host demos on TaxWise Online regularly that you can sign up for, kind of similar to today's session. And then we also have recorded demos that you can watch. So if you are currently a desktop user and are curious about online, feel free to check out all of those resources. I believe you should have seen that answer in the questions tab. And if you say yes, you'd love to learn more, we'll be reaching out to you. Let's give everyone just a few more seconds and I will close the poll. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right. So let me take a look at some of the questions. Can I prepare a return in TaxWise using a MacBook? Yes. That's because TaxWise Online is browser based. Let's see. Okay, yes. Someone is asking about the Spanish learning portal. We're going to have that in November. I'm glad you asked. We are unveiling the TaxWise Online Spanish learning portal. It's equipped with over 80 plus Spanish speaking product videos. It is going to be designed to provide comprehensive resources to our Spanish speaking community, so that everyone has access to the tools and knowledge that they need. There's also going to be some knowledge-based articles. There's going to be live and virtual tax support, and you can create support cases. And of course, like I mentioned, you have Spanish product videos. Let me see another question. Is the Schedule K1 separately filed with the IRS? The Schedule K1 is filed with the partnerships 1065. It's filed with the partnerships form 1065, and then that partnership is going to distribute it to each partner. So each partner is going to get their very own personal Schedule K1 that then they'll report their share of income and expenses on their 1040. All right. And it looks like we are basically getting close to running out of time here. And yeah,
And so, yeah, I think this would be a good time to go ahead and close this out. I just want to take a minute and thank you all for taking some time out of your day in order to learn about TaxWise and how it's going to be changing and learn about the preparation of a business return. Now, if you had a question that either didn't ask or we didn't have enough time really to get to, I would reach out to a sales consultant. And when it comes to some of the specifics of the tax software, very commonly Beverly and myself will schedule a one-on-one demonstration with prospective clients like yourself and really walk you through one more time like how to use the software. If you have any questions about specific forms, we can go ahead and do our best to answer those. But last thing that I'll say is I know busy season is kind of starting to lurk right around the corner. Just want to wish you all the best of luck. I've done many. I hope it is a very smooth sailing for you all and a very lucrative time. And with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this presentation and wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.